Good afternoon. Good Yontif. I invite you to take your seats in the sanctuary so that we can continue. Thank you for coming in and being seated. Our Yom Kippur Symposium begins. This highlight of each year at this holiday season reflects the deepest thoughts and personal comments of 4 individuals in our congregation who have accepted my invitation and also reflected on the theme of this hour, what Judaism means to me, or how Judaism has shaped my life. Every year, it is a highlight of our day. Beyond the prayers, messages, and music is what each of us can learn and feel from each other that helps us to feel not alone, but connected to the personal ways that each of us tries to live at our very best. And even when we stumble, to know that we are always connected to each other and always given an opportunity to try again. And so this year, I have the privilege of inviting to the pulpit to speak Malcolm Mazo, Barbara Klein, Sheila Aaron, and John Dreyfus. Thank you for your kind attention as we begin our Yom Kippur Symposium.
Good Yontif, everyone, and thank you, Rabbi, for asking me to participate in this symposium today. As many of you may know, this past January, I was privileged to celebrate my second bar mitzvah. As I began that adventure, I realized that in spite of having been bar mitzvahed at age 13 and attending religious school through confirmation, I was not prepared to undertake such an endeavor. So I wondered if I would and could actually do the work to become a bar mitzvah for the second time. I asked myself, what did I want to accomplish? How was I going to get there? And what would it mean to me? In my attempt to understand such an undertaking, I came to realize that when I prepared for my first bar mitzvah in 1948, I was doing what was expected of me. My family belonged to Beth Israel, so when I turned 13, my parents expected and planned for me to have a bar mitzvah, as was the tradition. So I went to religious school, memorized the Hebrew that I would recite in order to be a bar mitzvah. I'm not sure why I didn't learn more about being Jewish. At that time, maybe it was because it was just after World War II, and American Jewish practice was assimilate, and any external expression of Judaism, such as wearing yarmulkes, etc., was avoided. This time was different. No one expected me to have a second bar mitzvah. It was something I wanted to do. I wanted to learn Hebrew. I wanted to be able to read from the Torah. I wanted to learn the Torah portion, and I wanted to understand it. And I did. In fact, one of the things I learned at my Parsha is that God called out once again, this time not to Abraham, as we read in Rosh Hashanah services this past week, but this time was to Moses. God told Moses to go to Pharaoh and get Pharaoh to let my people go. But that's another story for another time. In addition to this extraordinary experience, I don't mean this to be a commercial for everyone to have a second bar mitzvah. There have been other events in my life that have formed my religious belief. So what happened in the 70 years between my 2 bar mitzvahs that impacted my Jewish feeling and made me want to be more knowledgeable, active participant in my religion? There are several specific events that I recall that have made Judaism important to me, and as with all of us, maturity helped me understand the importance of religion in my life. After I finished medical school, I moved to Iowa City, Iowa, to do a residency at the University of Iowa. One of my professors there invited me to Yom Kippur services and gave me the honor of holding one of the Torahs at Kol Nidre. What a warm and generous gesture and a memorable occasion for me. Wow. When I finished my training at Iowa, I moved back to Galveston, where I taught at the medical school and fulfilled my obligation to Uncle Sam as chief of ophthalmology at the public health hospital there. By now, I had 2 children of Sunday school age, so we joined Temple B'nai Israel. Well, they needed teachers for Sunday school, so I began teaching Sunday school, having to learn in order to teach. And I was barely a week ahead in my preparation for each class. When I completed my military obligation, we moved back to Houston, and I began my medical career, which I still enjoy today. By now, my children were ready to start school. Since I wanted them to have a Jewish education, they were enrolled in the Beth Yeshurun Day School. During that time, we had the opportunity to go on Rabbi Jack Siegel's first family mission to Israel. I still remember the feeling of flying on El Al to Eretz Yisrael, bursting into song as the plane began to land. I remember praying on the beach every morning wearing a kippah and a prayer shawl. I remember praying at the Western Wall, and best of all, seeing my 2 boys, Mark and Daryl, bar mitzvahed at the wall. Another wow. So now fast forward to 1989, the year that Jackie and I married. She was living in Dallas, so I went there to be with her for high holiday services at Shereth Israel, a conservative synagogue where she had belonged many years and had a close personal relationship with the clergy. I found that service to be beautiful, and it was very warm and welcoming community. But after several years, Jackie moved to Houston, and we made our way back to Beth Israel, that had been my original place of worship and where I had a personal relationship with the clergy. In fact, it was our dear friend Rabbi Sam Karf that married us. Yet another wow. So here I am back at Beth Israel, and I'm delighted that some of those outward expressions of Judaism that I have learned to enjoy, like wearing a kippah and a talis, especially on the high holidays, have become part of accepted tradition here. Just look around last night and today. I'm very glad to be back where I started my religious journey. So somewhere along the way, I'm not exactly sure, when I realized that many of the tenets of Judaism are the guiding principles that I rely on in my personal life and in my medical practice. As an ophthalmologist with special training in pediatric ophthalmology, I not only deal with patients' medical issues, but I need to understand their emotional needs and concerns, as well as the needs and concerns of the parents of my pediatric patients. Often, my biggest challenge is helping the parents deal with their children's condition and helping them understand the lifelong implications of their decisions in regard to the prescribed and recommended treatment for their child. It's hard to tell a parent of a newborn baby that their baby needs surgery to ensure their eyesight, or worse yet, telling a parent there's nothing that can be done to help their child see. That's when I really realized on my belief to give me strength, courage, compassion, empathy, and patience to explain and have such dire situations understood and accepted. So here I am, having practiced medicine for over 50 years, and at the age of 83, still questioning and searching for the answers, and looking forward to the next phase of my life and my relationship with my religion. Jackie often says that she started growing up in Houston, and it looks like she's going to finish growing up in Houston. So in the same vein, I started my religious training at Beth Israel, and it looks like I'm going to finish my religious journey here at Beth Israel. So in 13 years, when I'm 96, with God's help, like my late father-in-law Lou Kless, I hope I will celebrate my third bar mitzvah, and you're all invited. Shana Tova.
I'd like to thank Rabbi Lyon for the honor of speaking today. And I'd also like to say Mazel Tov to Rabbi Lyon and Mrs. Lyon for becoming grandparents. Your invitation to talk about personal experiences and the importance Judaism has played in my life gave me much to think about. As I look back through the years and delve into who and what influenced who I am today, I went back before I was born. So much of who we are is passed down to us from our parents and grandparents and their parents and grandparents, from generation to generation, Lador Vador. My parents, Leon and Lena Aaron, were first-generation Texans, children of Russian immigrants who came through Galveston in early 1900s. Both sets of grandparents left their families in Russia to make a better life in America. Mother's parents, Max and Sprincy Tapper, settled in Bryan, Texas. Sprincy managed to keep kosher with their one cow as their family grew to 7. Max sold bananas from a cart at first and eventually opened a dry goods store where all their family worked together. He was one of the founders of Temple Freda in Bryan and was honored to name it after his grandmother. It still stands today, over 100 years later, as a historical site. My father's parents, Abe and Rosie Aaron, met and married after they arrived in the U.S. Abe came to America with his 4 brothers and settled in Goose Creek, now known as Baytown, where they were in the furniture business. As newcomers to America, my grandparents struggled with the language, missing their families, knowing they would never see them again, yet they adapted. They started their families with hopes and dreams for the future. They welcomed other Russian immigrants to their homes, helping them begin their new lives in America. My grandparents may have left their families and homeland behind, but they never gave up their Judaism. They laid the foundation for us, the future generations, to celebrate our Jewish traditions. My parents were married in 1935, and after 5 years, they had twin daughters. My sisters, Vivian Manette and Joyce Harriet, or the Duchess as they are known. I have always considered myself so lucky to have twin sisters. Their love and support throughout my life is what God meant about the power of friendship and what it looks like at its best. I came along 4 years later. When my parents were married, they lived in Nacogdoches, where Daddy had a creosoting plant. They were asked by the Army base there if they would welcome 30 WACs for Passover. The 30 WACs were in the Women's American Corps. They gladly said yes. Mother described the evening beginning with the sound of footsteps that shook the ground as the WACs came marching down the street to their little house. As one WAC rode home to her parents said, this was the first time she ever heard Hebrew spoken with a Texas accent. My parents worked hard to make a good life for our family. When time allowed, Daddy enjoyed doing his favorite things, collecting antique cars and flying his airplanes. He loved to buzz the house to let Mother know he bought another one. Mother's time was devoted to the 3 of us. She taught herself how to sew and made all of our dresses. I could remember her doing the last finishing touches as the twins ran out the door. She volunteered for organizations that were important to her, such as Hadassah and the American Heart Association. In 1967, Mother became a Weight Watchers franchisee. Nutrition was something she was always very interested in, so this business was a perfect fit. Our whole family was involved with the daily operations of the business for 32 years. It was a happy business, and I am proud to have been a part of it. I honor my parents each and every day for being loving, caring, devoted, sometimes overprotective, supportive, and always available to my sisters and me. Judaism was always a part of who they were and how they lived their lives, which is inherently passed on to us. Shabbat dinner was a tradition in our home. Mother always lit the Shabbat candles and made 2 challahs, one for us and one for another family. Her challahs were delicious. She changed her recipe over and over until she finally tweaked it to perfection, and it was the best I have ever tasted. I made it yesterday and love the delicious smell of it baking. There's just nothing like it, and the memories it invokes. I even captured her on video making challah so her grands and great-grands could actually watch her make it. It is pure joy to watch the video because making challah was something Mother truly loved to do. On Shabbat, Daddy would say the blessings over the wine and challah in his Texas accent and pass a piece around the table for each of us to pinch a little off. This was our life. I loved it. It was ingrained in us to be proud of our Judaism. In 1970, I married Michael Spiegelman. During the 7 years we were married, we had a baby son who we named Matthew Aaron Spiegelman. When he was a few days old, he was diagnosed with a heart defect, and he passed away a week later. This tragedy was devastating. How could God do this? Had I done something terrible in my life to deserve this tragic loss? I couldn't understand how this could happen, why it happened, but it did. After losing my baby, I walked away from Judaism. I felt abandoned by God, the only one who could be blamed. I had always heard that something good comes from something bad, but what good could possibly come from losing my baby? Yet something good eventually came along. I rarely talked about my son, but the memory of his short life stayed deep inside my heart. After many unspoken years, I finally found the perfect way to honor his memory and that of Mother and Daddy when I wrote a book entitled, I'm Glad I'm Me, Weaving the Thread of Love from Generation to Generation, Lador Vador. It is a parenting book disguised as a children's book and teaches the language of love regardless of age. I give my book to organizations that work with abused children, such as Children's Assessment Center in their Psychology and Therapy Department and Harris County Protective Service. I'm often asked if I'm a psychiatrist or a psychologist, and how did I come to write this book? Or was I abused? I was never abused in any way, quite the opposite. My parents were kind, compassionate, and loving. In answering the question about my qualifications, my answer is, you don't need a degree to tell your child, I love you. I believe that my son Matthew was the guiding force behind my writing the book and every decision I have made since beginning this journey. I cherish his memory, and were it not for him, I might not have written the book. My precious son, who I would have told every day how much I loved him, made it possible for me to show others how easy it is to say the words, I love you. The pleasure that has come from writing this book is hard to put into words, but recently, as I was walking down the street in Santa Barbara, California, I happened to have a book with me. I noticed a young mother who was in obvious distress with her 2-year-old daughter who was having a meltdown. The mother looked like she was about to lose it too. I handed the book to her and said, "I hope this helps." She looked at me with tears in her eyes and said, "You have just diffused a very bad situation." I left them sitting together on a bench reading my book. For me, that moment said it all. After writing my book, I founded the Thread Alliance, a nonprofit organization dedicated to ending the cycle of child abuse and offering local, state, and national resources to those in a crisis. The mission of the Thread Alliance is to bring child abuse awareness and prevention to the forefront in the hopes that future generations will have childhoods free of abuse. I am very proud to say that the Thread Alliance has expanded, and there is now a chapter in Los Angeles, California, started by my nephew, Drew Singer, and his friend, Jake Grossman. Earlier this year, I bought a small condo in Santa Barbara. If you've never been there, it's one of the most beautiful places in the world, where 80 degrees is considered a heat wave. To meet people, where did I go first? To Temple, of course. Because the weather is so perfect, services are held outside in the summer. As the cantor sings, you can look at the beautiful mountains in the background, watch birds soar, or close your eyes and feel a gentle breeze. Immediately, I felt relaxed hearing the familiar prayers being chanted. I was home. Hineni, here I am. There are several people who have impacted my life, and I'd like to mention them to spotlight their importance. Cedella Manyweather was 17 years old when she answered an ad in the Brenham Want Ads that Mother placed to find someone to work for us. We picked her up at the bus station looking for a girl in a blue silk dress. There she was, 6 feet tall, skinny as a rail, and in a bright blue silk dress. She is now 88 years young and still part of our family. I call her every morning. Cedella says that she is the only African-American Jew in Brenham, and for sure, the best cook of Jewish food from all the wonderful meals she helped Mother prepare over the years. I'd also like to mention my two wonderful brother-in-laws, Stanley Littman and Gary Nimitz. I cherish them for their strength, support, guidance, and sense of humor through the many years. My 4 nieces and nephews and their spouses who are the true meaning of the word love, and 9 fabulous children they have blessed us with. They are all spectacular in my eyes. How lucky I am to have them in my life. I love them more than words can say. I am thankful for this opportunity to express my deep appreciation to all those who came before me and all those who have been there for me along the way. On this Yom Kippur, I wish everyone a happy, healthy year for you and your loved ones. Shana Tova Tikatevi.
Beautifully done. Very brave. Beautifully done.
Thank you, Rabbi Lyon. I'm a combination of circumstances, experiences, and inner workings of the heart and soul. So this is me. I'm proudly Jewish. I'm the single mother of an adult child that has an intellectual disability. I'm a people person, although initially shy when I first meet someone. I love animals, especially dogs. I like puzzles, I like mysteries and games, and I have an inner strength that has stood me well throughout the years. I am a Southerner, a steel magnolia. My story starts in Montgomery, Alabama in 1950. I was the youngest of 3 children and the only girl born to conservative Jewish parents. My brothers were 6 and 13 years older than I, and at times I felt like I was reared as an only child. In the South, we rear children, we raise cattle. My older brother left for college when I was 5 years old, and he never came back to live with the family. He made Aliyah to Israel in 1968, and although I loved him dearly, I never really got to have a brother-sister relationship with him. Unfortunately, he passed away in 2015, and that lack of relationship saddens me, but is something I do accept. My older brother still lives in Montgomery and actually lives in the house where I was reared. We don't talk often, but as the gap in age becomes less, we have become closer. I had what I believed was a wonderful childhood. I had many friends, mostly Jewish. I grew up in a conservative Jewish household, not kosher, but without pork, shellfish, or catfish, another Southern thing. In those years, there were 3 synagogues in Montgomery, a Reform, a Sephardic, and a Conservative. Although we were members of the Conservative synagogue, I had friends from all 3. I attended Hebrew school, Sunday school, had a bat mitzvah, was confirmed, attended Friday night services and Saturday morning services, joined a Jewish sorority in college, the whole schmear. Unfortunately, life was ideal, and I wasn't adequately prepared or emotionally prepared for the trials that I would face later in life. I know now that God has instilled in me what I needed to manage the future. I've always been a me-do-it person, even as a toddler, and I'm so glad I embraced that God-given strength because I've so needed it. As a young adult out of the nest, I moved away from my Jewish upbringing. I felt like I had so much of it pushed on me as a child that I was trapped by the things that were required to be Jewish. I couldn't date on Friday nights. I couldn't go to the movies on Saturday mornings. I couldn't join brownies when all the other girls did because I had to go to Hebrew school. So I guess I just rebelled, did what I wanted to do. And since hindsight is 20/20, I'm pretty sure this wasn't a good idea. And this is the rest of my story. At a very young age, I was married to a man who wasn't Jewish. He took an interest in Judaism, but I believe that converting from Baptist to Judaism would have been a very difficult transition, and his family probably would have been very, very upset. Unfortunately, we divorced after 5 years. We have a son who is now 47 years old. When he was little, he went to Sunday school at the Reform Temple and had some exposure to his Jewish religion. But to this day, he claims the religion of his father. Periodically, I like to remind him that he is Jewish by birth. I remarried a couple of years after my divorce. We had a son, Adam, and my older son, Edward, lived with us. I must tell you that I intuitively knew from the time I was expecting Adam that there was something different with this younger child. Although there was an 8-year gap between pregnancies, I knew this one was not like the first. The pregnancy progressed, and my son was born after 9 months. He had all his fingers and toes, and the only medical condition we knew about was jaundice. As time passed, Adam didn't seem as alert as other babies. He would drop his head when sitting up and was diagnosed with weak muscle tone. He developed a crossed eye at 6 months and was diagnosed with an eye condition called 6-nerve palsy, and he was a late walker. He had multiple ear infections from 4 months old and finally had tubes put in his ears. When the doctor came out of surgery, he said, "He can hear now." I had no idea the child couldn't hear, but it must have been true because that very afternoon, after ear surgery, he started babbling, soon started talking, and talks quite a bit to this day. The 4 of us moved to Houston for my husband's job. Culture shock. When I saw Houston the very first time, I cried real tears. Where were the trees? Where was the green space and the traffic? We bought a home in Kingwood, and I commuted to downtown for my job at AT&T. Times were hard for me when I lived in Kingwood, not financially, but emotionally. Adam was officially diagnosed at the Meyer Center with an intellectual developmental disability. Back then, it was called mental retardation, and he was enrolled in a Humble ISD special ed program at 4 years old. I'll never forget being at McDonald's in Kingwood, and one of the children from the daycare Adam attended came up to me and asked me if Adam was retarded. I was stunned and, of course, in denial. How the adults at that daycare must have talked. My son Edward was a teenager, and he defied my husband one time too many. And without my knowledge, my husband packed him up and sent him to live with his father. To my dying day, I will regret that I did not take action to leave at that time. Reasons aside, I feel all I have is excuses to offer. 2 years later, my son Edward was critically injured in an auto accident and basically bled out. It was a miracle and a blessing that a paramedic was visiting the fire station that was called and decided to go on that call. And this visiting paramedic saved my son's life. I was in Texas, and let me tell you, there are limited flights from Houston to Montgomery, Alabama. After Edward's accident, my husband was transferred to South Georgia, and I was able to transfer to Atlanta, 4 hours from my spouse and 3 hours from my injured son. After living in Atlanta for 4 years, my husband Adam and I moved back to Houston. Again, my emotional stress prevailed. My son Edward had been married and divorced. Nonsensical arguments between me and my husband occurred frequently. I enrolled Adam in special education classes at Red Elementary School. It took a year, but I finally found a Special Olympics team in our area that Adam joined, and he's still a member of that same team 27 years later. And this is the period when I finally, in my heart of hearts, realized that my son had a developmental disability that I was going to have to deal with for the rest of our lives. With the help of a wonderful therapist who I had known since the 80s, I learned that I had to grieve the idea of a normal child, that I had to go down a road that I had never considered, nor had I been reared to understand. That I had to accept that situation so that I could give my son opportunities for him to live life possible given his limited abilities. Moving forward 5 tumultuous years, my husband and I separated. After a year of drama and major expense, we were divorced. He used to see his son regularly, but slowly has weaned that down to texting and very infrequent phone calls. Post-divorce, Adam and I lived in my house near Beth Israel. I didn't know how at the time, but I was able to pay expenses, keep my house, and even retire. So Adam and I now had 2 dogs, were living in our house. He had activities that kept him engaged, and I started making new friends, and it even started going back to religious services. But so far, only for the high holidays and with Adam in tow. Things were going along fairly smoothly, and boom, Hurricane Ike. Thank goodness the house did not sustain damage, but we were without power for 11 days. I had Adam with me the whole time and made it like a big adventure. He even went to work with me for a week before he was able to get back to his routine. Life again moved along for us. I continued to talk and visit with my son Edward in Alabama, who had remarried. I was feeling more confident, I learned to worry less, and mostly accepted the lifetime responsibility of taking care of my son. I went to shul with my friends, out to eat, played mahjong regularly, and took Adam to his activities and made friends with the mothers and fathers of other children and adults with disabilities. Along the way, I was feeling more rooted in my Judaism and wanted to grow that feeling. I liked the temple I was attending. I liked the clergy. I liked the congregation. So I joined. I didn't feel just like a new member. I felt the community pulling me in. I was finally myself again, part of something I believed in and was born into. I discussed this with my brother, who also joined the temple in his hometown. We half joked about a lot of folks our age who had gone back to their Jewish faith, figuring it was because we were getting closer to the end. Then came Hurricane Harvey, and we did sustain major damage to our home. As the house filled with water, I had to figure out how to care for Adam, our 2 dogs, and how to get rescued. I packed important papers, some clothes, our medicines, toilet articles, and got out a life jacket I had in the closet for Adam. I put harnesses on the dogs and got their leashes ready. I had friends calling around trying to get us rescued. I put a sign in the front window. All along, the house is filling with more water. I turned down a canoe and an inflatable raft, but when the fishing boat with an outboard motor came along, I knew I had to get us out of there. Adam, 2 dogs, and I climbed aboard with others and left. We were delivered to 610 at Meyerland Plaza. We took a ride with a stranger who somehow got us to the George R. Brown. From there, circumstances were looking a little dicey, and I heard someone say there were openings at Embassy Suites. Thank goodness for credit cards. We were able to check in there and stayed for a week. My niece from Fort Worth and my son Edward and his wife came from Alabama, and they helped kickstart me to get the house cleaned out. Edward and his wife decided to take Adam and my dogs back to Alabama with them so I could have time and space to get our lives back in order. Notice I say our lives, because I must provide a safe and clean environment for Adam. All this time, Adam is a trooper, seems to go with the flow, and only had 1 or 2 meltdowns. As traumatic as Hurricane Harvey has been, my family, friends, and the Jewish community were the ones that gave me hope and put my life back together. Of course, in any situation, you have to help yourself if you can. You have to make the calls. You have to fill out the paperwork. Thank you, Beth Israel, for the emotional support and the funds and the gift cards that sustained us. Thank you, Jewish Federation and Jewish Family Services, for the funds to get temporary housing and for giving us a place to lay our heads and store our clothes and put our home back in order. As inconvenienced and displaced as we have been for all the material things we lost, I recognize the blessings. It has certainly shown me what is important in life and shown me how something as simple as a neighbor handing out homemade chocolate cookies during a disaster helps recovery. I have learned the importance of giving back and pray for success in doing so. My life has certainly been down a road less traveled, but being part of a Jewish community, my faith in God even during tough times, my personal belief that I am blessed with certain characteristics that I've chosen to own have made this life's journey a learning experience. I am content with my life. I pray to remain living strong and sensitive to those in need and to remain a steel magnolia. And my prayer for all of you is shalom. Thank you.
I know.
You must be joking. This was my immediate response to Rabbi Lyon's request to participate in the symposium. Apparently, synagogue attendance is not a requirement for symposium speakers. On Shabbat, given a choice between a prayer book or popcorn, I usually choose popcorn. I need Google Maps to find my way to Beth Israel. I don't even answer half the Old Testament questions correctly on Jeopardy. After my initial reaction, I gave it some thought. I love speaking to an audience and am immensely proud of being Jewish and my Jewish heritage. My faith is like Mort Foxman's, a character in Jonathan Tropper's novel, This Is Where I Leave You. Mort's dying wish is for his 4 adult children to come together, sitting Shiva after his passing. The children reminisce about Mort, an atheist who still attended services 2 or 3 times a year. When Mort was asked why he went to synagogue, his response was, "Well, I've been wrong before." Like Mort, I'm unsure of my belief in God, yet something draws me to services a few times a year. Rather than having a strong faith, I'm drawn to Judaism by cultural, social, and family connections. My Jewish experience began with my upbringing in San Antonio. My parents, Seymour and Jane, were both heavily involved in the Jewish community. My father's grandparents left Mannheim, Germany in the 1870s and settled in Livonia, Louisiana, becoming store owners and planters. After moving to San Antonio, my father became a president of Temple Bethel, was involved in the Federation and Morningside Manor, and helped lay the groundwork for Green Family Camp. My mother's paternal grandparents immigrated from the Ukraine in the 1890s. They lived in Chicago and moved to San Antonio, where my great-grandfather Nathan resumed his career as a harness maker, became a store owner, then a prominent farmer and rancher. Recently, an elementary school in San Antonio was named in Nathan Callison's honor, and the book The Harness Maker's Dream chronicles his journey. I had a great uncle, Perry Callison, who had the longest-running farm and ranch radio report in Texas. Uncle Perry, the old trader, had interviewed Lyndon Johnson during the 1948 senatorial campaign and on Election Day of the 1960 presidential campaign. Callison's store was a downtown San Antonio institution. My mother's maternal grandparents immigrated from Poland in the 1870s. My great-grandfather, Ben Dubinsky, was an accomplished inventor whose contributions included inventing the Nickelodeon jukebox. During my senior year of high school, I worked at Callison's, getting my first taste of the retail business. My sweet, kind mother, Jane, was involved with both the Sisterhood and the National Council for Jewish Women. Despite having a smaller Jewish community in San Antonio, my parents built a strong network of Jewish friends. My siblings, Kathy, Mark, and I remain close to our parents' friends and many of their children. Our parents instilled in us important Jewish values, treating others with dignity and respect, demonstrating integrity and honesty at home and at work. My selfless mother assisted those less fortunate than herself. She was instrumental in establishing child advocates in San Antonio through the National Council of Jewish Women. She advocated for children's rights in the courts. Mom always thought of the needs of others first. Both parents were avid readers, encouraging us to be lifelong learners. We attended services and went to religious school regularly as Talmidim under the watchful eyes of educator Milton Bendiner and Rabbi David Jacobson. Because of my gregarious father, we were often the last to leave the Oneg. I was somewhat involved in SAFTI, our youth group, traveled to the big city Houston for a Tofty convention, and ventured to Camp Carter with Tofty one summer. I barely dipped my toes in the pool of Jewish activities, but did not dive in. The allure of the gridiron and the hardwoods, playing for the Woodridge Wolverines and Alamo Heights Mules in junior school, overcame any considerations I had of becoming a bar mitzvah. Growing up, I discovered something that gave me a strong personal Jewish connection. Dad brought home 2 records, Mel Brooks and Carl Reiner's 2001 Year Old Man, and an album called You Don't Have to Be Jewish. We wore out the grooves on those records. To this day, Kathy and I will be happy to perform one of the bits from You Don't Have to Be Jewish at the drop of a hat. Honey, I've got a surprise for you. Kathy loved listening to Oscar and Hammerstein's show tunes and singing with Barbra Streisand. I remember watching The Ed Sullivan Show, seeing Sherry Lewis, Buddy Hackett, Joan Rivers. Tuesday nights were reserved for Red Skelton. I remember Dad taking me to see Woody Allen's Take the Money and Run, Neil Simon's The Odd Couple, and Billy Wilder's The Fortune Cookie. One day sitting at home, I discovered my first Marx Brothers movie, Horse Feathers. I was hooked. They were irreverent. I loved the wordplay and the slapstick endings. I was elated when Dad told me the Marx Brothers were 5 Jewish boys from New York. I bought every Marx Brothers book and album and memorized many of Groucho's wisecracking dialogues. I even taught a Marx Brothers mini course in high school. My love of Jewish humor continues. My favorite comedians include Mel Brooks and Rodney Dangerfield. Take Henny Youngman, please. Albert Brooks, David Tell, Seinfeld, Richard Lewis, who once I heard say, "I'm an observant Jew. I love to observe Jews." The brilliant Andy Kaufman, yes, Pee Wee Herman, Larry David, Abby and Alana from Broad City, and Sacha Baron Cohen, to name just a few. I attended UT Austin, joined a Jewish fraternity, made a lot of new friends. Although studying business, I started frequenting movies on a more regular basis. I was fascinated by film and proud of so many of the great Jewish contributors, including Stanley Kubrick, my favorite director. I'm also immensely proud of the many Jewish contributors to music and the arts. I get inspired listening to Gershwin's Rhapsody in Blue and American in Paris. It's wonderful and it's marvelous. I can stand mesmerized looking at the ethereal works of Rothko, Modigliani, and Chagall. Randy Newman's brilliant satiric album Sail Away and Paul Simon's Graceland are among my favorites. I've read Joseph Heller's Catch-22 twice. After graduation, I moved to Houston, beginning my career at Foley's. I felt comfortable in the retail environment. Most of Foley's upper management, many vendors, and some of my fellow associates were Jewish. At 23, I felt compelled to enroll in the adult bar mitzvah class at Beth Israel. I was not exactly the star pupil, but enjoyed the experience. I was proud reciting the prayers and Torah portion at my class's bar mitzvah. At Foley's, I met my future wife, Debbie Meyer, from Meridian, Mississippi. Our first date, we heard the Neville Brothers at Rockefeller's. She liked movies and entertainment. I liked movies and entertainment. She loved going to sporting events. I loved going to sporting events. She enjoyed traveling. I enjoyed traveling. She loved to cook. I loved to eat. It's a marriage made in heaven. We've been happily married for 31 years. She's our family's steadying presence, our Rock of Gibraltar. Our first child, Jessica, was born during our second year of marriage. We were invited to Beth Israel with baby Jesse for a Shabbat blessing. There was a power outage that night at the temple. Rabbi Karf blessed her in the parking lot in the dark. I didn't think that was going to get a laugh at all. It was beautiful. 14 months after Jessica's birth, Debbie went into labor with our second child right here during Rabbi Karf's Yom Kippur evening sermon. Right over there. I did not think it was appropriate to leave during Rabbi Karf's sermon. To my astonishment, Debbie overruled me. Second daughter, Lisa, was born. 14 months later, Debbie was pregnant again, this time with identical twin boys. A young assistant who looked actually even younger than he does today, it's hard to believe, Rabbi Lyon, named Charlie and David in our home. We had 4 children during our first 5 years of marriage. The kids began their educations at Schlenker and attended religious school. In an effort to save a few shekels, Jessica and Lisa became bat mitzvah together at ages 12 and 13. Lisa made me promise that I would not force her and Jessica to get married together. Charlie and David also became bar mitzvah at Beth Israel. The boys attended public school and transferred to Emory Weiner their junior year. It was a great move for both boys and helped contribute to their future success. As the kids grew, I climbed the corporate ladder at Foley's, becoming a senior VP of merchandising. I had many unforgettable experiences, including being in New York City September 11th and during the big blackout. My career came to an abrupt halt when I was fired after 25 years of employment. It was a shock and still stings a little to this day. During my 2-year work hiatus, I received support from friends and family and even received some career advice from Rabbi Lyon. I ventured on my own, purchasing Sprint Bindery, a small business I've owned for 12 years. I also helped my dad conduct his business affairs. Our daughter Jessica was engaged to Colin Bozarth, a bright and talented engineer. The wedding was planned for October 17, 2015. My beloved mother's health had been declining for some time. She was determined to make it to Jessica's wedding. Unfortunately, Mom fell into a coma 6 days prior to the wedding and passed away 2 days before it. In Jewish tradition, we choose life, moving forward with the life cycle events, by doing so, honoring my mother's memory. Seeing your first child get married is an incredibly emotional experience. My emotions were raw. We all managed to pull through the wedding and the funeral together. The experience was more powerful than you can imagine. Jessica, in my mother's tradition of helping the less fortunate, is a social worker living in Austin. She's a program manager helping families with autistic children. Lisa was joined under the chuppah this January with Richard Robbins in a service led beautifully by Rabbi Scott. Currently, Richard and Lisa reside in Houston. She uses her bubbly personality to develop business opportunities for Moet Hennessy. Richard is a doctor specializing in therapeutic endoscopy who is finishing his fellowship this spring at Baylor and is looking for work if any of you might want to help the family out in the Houston area. I'm also very proud of the accomplishments of our sons. Charlie is an investment management associate for Gerald Hines. He moves to London next month with his girlfriend, Danielle Levy. David is enjoying a successful career as a mergers and acquisitions associate for SunTrust. He shares time with his girlfriend, Kate McGann Ludwin, in Atlanta. With all 4 kids away from home and free time on my hands, I began looking for a new challenge. It was time to volunteer my services like my parents did. I jumped at the opportunity to join the film committee at the JCC. I was immediately engaged by the other cinemaphiles, eventually co-chairing and chairing the committee twice. I helped develop new programs, including the 13th anniversary Mazel Tov video and the Chairman's Choice selection. As chairman, I selected 3 Marx Brothers movies, including A Night at the Opera and Duck Soup. I actually cried sitting with Kathy watching A Night at the Opera, smudging my grease paint mustache and eyebrows having dressed as Groucho. In addition to the Jay's Film Committee, I'm co-chairman of the Books and Art Festival, which begins November 3rd. Everybody put that on your calendar. And will chair next year. As a film lover and avid reader, I've discovered a niche that fits my interests perfectly. All 4 kids had traveled to Israel. Now it was our turn. Having heard rave reviews from friends and family, we joined the Beth Israel trip in June. Rabbis Lyon and Scott led 21 congregants across Israel, venturing to Tel Aviv, the Sea of Galilee, Svat, the Golan Heights, Jerusalem, Masada, and the Dead Sea. Both rabbis provided excellent leadership, along with our extremely knowledgeable, passionate guide and guest lecturers. It's one thing to see Israel on a map, on the evening news, or watching Fauda or other Israeli films. It's an entirely different experience being there. I was awestruck by our tour of the Golan Heights. At the Lebanese and Syrian borders, we were flanked by members of the IDF, our kids' ages. From our vantage point, we heard artillery fire from the Syrian civil war. Shortly afterwards, we took a short Jeep ride to purchase chocolate and cappuccinos, followed by a tour of a winery. This is part of everyday life in Israel. An added bonus was reacquainting with old friends and meeting new ones. Energized by the trip, I immediately stopped deleting the congregation's emails and look forward to attending more programs. Despite my assumption that I wasn't very Jewish, I've been involved in Jewish activities and enjoyed Jewish culture my whole life. Having wonderful parents as role models to guide me, having strong relationships with my siblings, extended family and friends, building a strong marriage, raising 4 exceptional kids, celebrating life cycle events, engaging in the community with film and book festivals, traveling to Israel, maybe I'm more Jewish than I thought. Like Mort Foxman said, I've been wrong before. Shana Tova.
Thank you to our speakers, and thank you to each of you for your attention and your interest in their stories. Thank you. Beautiful.